Turning a pen, Part 2. Starting with the blanks and the brass tubes already in them, then the first tool we need is a barrel trimmer. This is used to square off the ends of the wooden blank and to clean the glue from the middle of the brass tube. You can see that this drills into the wood, leaving you a square end to the tube, and at the same time cleans the centre of the tube out of any surplus glue. This needs to be done to both ends of both pieces, and if you do it correctly, you will notice that you get the shiny clean end of the brass tube that's inside. To work on the lathe, we need a pen mandrel. This comes with spacers and end nut. This one is tapered to fit into the headstock and is adjustable. Here you can see the 7mm spacers and the brass end nut. The end of the mandrel is shaped to take the revolving centre in the tailstock. Once the mandrel has been fitted to the headstock, we put on one spacer. This way the wood is as close as it can be to the headstock. Notice the alignment mark in the middle. One more spacer and the other piece of wood goes on. Note that the two alignment marks are next to each other in the middle of the pen. More spacers are put on so that the end nut can clamp the whole system down. The tailstock is now brought in and located into the end of the mandrel. This ensures that everything runs parallel. There are two types of roughing gouge that we use. Notice that these are quite large. The first one has a square end to it. The other has a slightly curved end, but they both perform the same job. Next we have the scrapers. There are various sizes and various end shapes to this tool, but both the ones shown here will work in the same way. The scrapers are good tools for the beginner to use, but the action does cause some damage to the wood. At last we get on to the lathe. Here I am using the round-ended roughing gouge. We need to take the square section of wood down to a cylinder. The gouge is a cutting tool unlike the scraper. It acts like a plane or a chisel and will cut along the length of the wood. In this way there's less damage to the timber that you're using, but it does take a bit of practice to get the technique just right. This is the other gouge, which is larger and has a square end. Cutting action is very similar to the one I've just shown you, and you can see that it will cut in both directions. When roughing down to the cylinder, the lathe will be running at a relatively slow speed. It's not possible to say exactly what speed because that depends very much on the lathe. The scraper is different to use and cuts differently. You see it jamming the piece of wood here. That's because of the scraping action rather than the cutting action. It's simpler to use but does not achieve such a good finish on the cut. However, we are roughing, so it is possible to use the scraper to do this work. One thing to watch for is when you reach the end of the cut, or the recess that you cut with the barrel trimmer, the end will just disappear. This happens at both ends of the piece of wood. We're back to the gouge again, and this time you can see it's been sharpened. Working the front piece of wood, you can see that the gouge is very effective at removing wood. And even with the gouge, we get to the point where that end will jump, showing us that we're down to the next size. It is my intention in this video to show you that there are a number of different tools that can be used in different techniques. Here you're seeing a bowl gouge being used in the same way that we were using the roughing gouge and the scraper. The bowl gouge is a different shape and cuts in a slightly different way, but it allows us to consider some quite intricate work. The other thing we could use is a spindle gouge, which works in much the same way again. We are currently working on the top part of the pen, which is going to be parallel. Because of this, we can use yet another tool, but this one needs changes to the tool rest, as you can see. But bringing in the skew chisel, we can use this like a plane, which will give us a straight and polished finish. You can see the cutting action, the shape of the tool, etc. are all different to what we've seen before. For a beginner, straight cuts are okay and very good for practice on. The bottom of the pen I am going to shape. After all, this is a handcrafted item. And to do that, I'm going to use a scraper. The right way up would help. Small scraper this time, and you can see that I'm adding a taper to the front of the pen, or to the bottom of the pen rather, and that needs to go down to the same size as the metal spacer. Then using the scraper, I'm going to add my own shaping to this part of the pen. There are no clips or anything on this part, so we can do any shape we like. You should have noticed that the speed of the lathe has been increased. Once we've roughed down and we actually start the shaping, we can increase the speed of the lathe by quite a bit. On my lathe, I would take this up to about 1500 RPM. Continue to shape until you're satisfied, and make sure that you're down to the correct size. As you get more practice, the finish that you'll get from the chisels, either the scrapers or the gouges, will get better, and that will mean there's less sanding. Time for a word of warning. Try and make sure that your shape never gets to a smaller diameter than the metal spacers. You have very, very little wood to play with here.